Emancipation, Union advantages, and effects of the Civil War. Let's start with the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation was actually preceded by the Confiscation Acts, first signed in May of 1861. There were subsequent ones as well. And what these acts did was state that the Union Army would not return slaves that they encountered or that they captured, let's say. Right? This meant that slaves could gain freedom by simply running over to the Union side of the conflict, by running over to Union camps. And eventually, 1 out of every 4 slaves will do this, either through the Confiscation Acts or the Emancipation Proclamation, which comes later. On January 1st, 1863, Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation, which officially freed all slaves in rebellion states. So technically, that doesn't really free a single slave. It doesn't free the slaves in the border states. Technically, that doesn't free any slaves. It doesn't free the slaves in the border states. And the states in rebellion aren't going to listen to Abraham Lincoln anyway. But what that meant was that as the Union Army continued to progress, they were liberating more and more slaves, as they had done with the Confiscation Acts. Politically, its effect is much more important. The Emancipation Proclamation means that the government is now committed to abolition of slavery. Whereas the Republican Party was previously just committed to stopping the spread of slavery, now the entire U.S. government is committed to the abolition of the institution of slavery. It also means that the military is now fighting against slavery, not secession. The military is now fighting against slavery. Emancipation leads to African Americans in the war effort. It authorized, as well as freeing slaves, it authorized the recruitment of freed slaves as Union soldiers. And as a result, about 200,000 African Americans will serve in the Army and Navy. Now, they'll serve in segregated regiments, all black units, probably most famously the Massachusetts 54th Regiment, which is the unit that the movie Glory was made about. Emancipation also has a big effect on foreign relations. Emancipation and the Emancipation Proclamation helped prevent the Confederacy from gaining full diplomatic support from European powers. We already learned about how the cotton shortages as a result of the South being blockaded did not have the effect that Southerners were hoping. European powers like Britain are able to secure cotton from places like India and Egypt. They also get other materials like linen and wool. Additionally, Robert E. Lee and the Confederate Army's loss at the Battle of Antietam, or rather lack of a decisive win at Antietam, prevents European support. Europeans, like Britain, are waiting for a decisive military victory on the side of the South before they're willing to support their move for independence. But emancipation also has a big effect on foreign relations. The Emancipation Proclamation makes ending slavery a goal for the North, and that was very popular with the British working class people. And what that means is, unless they really want to anger everyone in Britain, the British government cannot support the pro-slavery South. Emancipation also leads to reaction in the North. When the draft actually begins in 1863, it had been authorized previously, but a draft in the North actually begins in 1863. The draft draws a lot of criticism and resistance. Part of it was due to the structure. If you could find a replacement, if you could pay somebody to be your substitute, you didn't have to go. Or you could just fork over cash. If you gave enough money, you didn't have to go. And what this leads to is some riots in New York City. Many working class people are upset at being drafted, and they're also concerned that their jobs would not be there when they got back. They were worried that their jobs would be taken by free blacks. In the summer of 1863, there are riots in New York City, and over 100 people are killed. The draft and emancipation is also part of the Peace Democrats movement. In the election of 1864, the Democrats run former General George McClellan on a platform of finding an immediate peace with the South, negotiating a peace with the South. And as you can see from this campaign literature, they tried to scare people away from voting for Lincoln by associating him with the draft and with Negro equality, with rights for African Americans. Nonetheless, Lincoln is able to win that election.